the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and we have a fantastic show lined up for you this evening. We're looking at subjects that matter to you, issues that matter to you. First up on the show, we're going to be talking about this sudden urge to increase retail prices of fuel every day. We've had hikes every day for the last 6 days, a total of 3 rupees 31 paise for petrol in the last 6 days. Is this fair? Because we didn't really see the benefits when crude were at massive lows internationally. We're going to talk about that on the show. We're also going to look at, through expert lens, the details of what this second wave is all about. It's a panic that has hit the United States. Can there be a second wave in India? When can it possibly be? And is that what has fueled rumors of a second lockdown? We also have a nice Friday piece for you. Bulavo Sitavo is becoming a major movie, perhaps one of the first to go straight to an OTT platform. Its director, Shujit Sarkar, will join us on the show. But first, let's talk about fuel prices. The common man is enraged with the fact that while there has been a hit in incomes, while there have been pay cuts and job cuts, fuel prices at the retail pump have gone on increasing. Now, the reason that this has happened now and not earlier is because demand has gone up after the lockdown has ended and more people have been getting out. So when OMCs have now finally decided to pass on the burden of increased excise duty hikes. So essentially, we didn't really get the benefit when crude prices were low, and as they inch up, we're feeling the entire brunt. Before we begin the discussion, let's look at exactly what's going on.
India saw a fuel price hike for the 6th consecutive day on Friday. Petrol prices have increased by 57 paise per litre and diesel by 59 paise a litre. So in the last 6 days, petrol prices have gone up by 3 rupees 31 paise a litre and diesel by 3 rupees 42 paise. But crude oil rates have slumped below the $40 a barrel mark. So why are retail fuel rates still rising in India? The simple answer to this is that oil marketing companies are adjusting retail rates after a hiatus of 82 days. Oil companies had put rate revisions on hold after the government hiked excise duty on petrol and diesel by 3 rupees each on the 14th of March. The companies decided not to pass on the hike to consumers and instead adjust them against the gains they were making due to the fall in crude prices. Last month, a revenue-starved government decided to hike excise duty by a record 10 rupees a litre on petrol and 13 rupees a litre on diesel. This hike too was not passed on to consumers. But remember, India imports 85% of its oil needs. And as economic activities begin and demand for oil increases, the OMCs have again started revising retail prices to offset the hit they took during the lockdown. In fact, Indian Oil in a statement this week says the consumption of oil petroleum products put together has almost doubled in May compared to the level in April. But the price rise couldn't have come at a more unfortunate time. Consumers across the country are already reeling under the strain of jobs and income losses, and fuel prices will impact the Aadmi most of all.
So here's the long and short of it. In the beginning of this year, in January, when the crude basket was at about 64, we were paying still about 74 rupees a litre for petrol, out of which your taxes were close to 40 rupees. In June, you're still paying very high taxes of close to 52 rupees a litre. Now, we know that the government needs money. Finances are required, but does it all have to come from this particular bucket of consumers? To speak on this, I'm joined today by R.S. Sharma, former CMD of ONGC. Saurabh Chandra is joining us, former Secretary of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. And of course, ET Now's consulting editor, Mythili Bhusnurmath. Welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us on the show this evening. Mr. Sharma, first your take. It seems blatantly unfair that, you're supposed to have retail prices in line with international prices, but this little excise duty adjustment takes place whenever the government sees fit, and then the OMC decides whether to pass it on or not. So it doesn't really seem to be in alignment with what's happening in international markets.
Well, Tamanna, I don't find anything wrong with what is happening about the price scenario. In fact, I have been on your channel also earlier when the prices had crashed. The day price had crashed and WTI went to minus, and that what will happen, the pricing here. I said, well, here, these are very abnormal times. Nothing in the world today is happening in a normal way, as if the whole world system has been rebooted. So that precisely is happening here also. And if you may recall, the last day of the this budget session, government had taken by through an amendment in the budget approval of the parliament to increase excise duty up to rupees 8 per litre on petrol as well as on diesel. Now you look at it, the kind of budget the government is having, the kind of reforms package, the kind of relief that is being given. This is also reconciled that the fiscal deficit target will not be achieved. Yes. So the issue with the government is where from to garner these resources.
No, but Mr. Sharma, I would have got
just
that
one
argument.
issue. Just one issue I will say.
This was the only time this has happened.
Just one sentence
whenever the government wants resources, then the excise duty, sort of gets bumped up so that none of the crude drop prices, crude drop benefits are passed on. It's not the first time it's happened. And if there are elections, then suddenly there are no hikes, no matter how high the crude goes. We've seen that as well, Mr. Sharma.
Yeah. Look, that is what I am coming to that, and I'm sure Mr. Saurabh Chandra will feel embarrassed to answer it because he has been in a position where they had to take decisions. I feel that transparency is the issue that is sadly getting compromised. The government repeatedly keeps saying these prices stand deregulated. We have no say over how the prices are fixed. They are decided by the all marketing companies. But the fact remains, there is one cell in the Ministry of Petroleum, PPAC. Through PPAC and through government nominees on the boards of these companies, the government is able to influence the decision with these companies that do not disturb the apple cart, do not allow the volatility to come through, and whatever is the government objective, at this point of time, the objective is to collect more and more revenues. And levies on this petroleum products is the single largest source of revenue for the center as well as state governments. Best part of it is the most convenient. None of the government agencies have to do anything. They have to just fix the price. Oil marketing companies through petrol pumps, they collect the levies and duties and quietly deposit in the government treasury. There's no leakage of revenue in the process.
Yes.
So this is the most convenient mode. Only thing I keep saying that let there be transparency. Let the government have the audacity to come and say, well, these are normal times.
So you're saying it's okay if consumers are quote unquote being looted. At least tell us about it. So yes. Saurabh Chandra, why don't you come in, sir? Why don't you come in, sir, and tell me, isn't this blatantly unfair? And this whole argument that, this is happening because of coronavirus, come on, that's not true. Everyone on this panel knows that's not true. That is very convenient. Whenever there is a drop in crude, then this excise duty proportion goes up.
Let me clarify something. The decision to increase or decrease prices is not a board decision. It is an executive decision. It's taken by the executive of the oil companies. That's part one of it. And the decision to hike excise duty is not taken in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. It's taken in the Ministry of Finance, Department of Revenue. Now, having said that, the prices are determined transparently. They are linked to Singapore petrol prices as far as petrol is concerned and the Gulf diesel prices. So the formula is there. What has tweaked it is the increase in excise duty, and wherever VAT is ad valorem, it's due to, and VAT is chargeable on excise duty, therefore that also goes up. That's how the formula goes. Now, coming back to why this has been done. Now, look, at the moment, there are no good or bad choices. What is the choice before the government? Corporate taxes, income tax is far, far higher than what Government of India gets from excise duty on hydrocarbons. But one doesn't see too much happening there. GST is down. Non-tax revenues from disinvestment, we are in a complete era of uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is where the probability that you attach to an event is completely subjective. There's no distribution which you can. So we are all actually shooting in the dark. Now, in a situation like this, in a pandemic like this, where your revenues have shrunk, your demand has shrunk, GDP is going down. When your GDP goes down, your tax to GDP ratio, even if it remains the same, ensures that you are getting lower taxes. So what does the government do? The demand for resources is much higher.
Yeah.
So you actually have no choice.
No, I get that argument. And I was prepared that that's the argument that's going to come. So let me bring in Mythili here, on this point. This is the argument we hear, Mythili, all the time, whether there is a pandemic or not. That's what I started by saying. I would have bought the argument if this was the first time we'd heard it. But there's no point at which the government says that, I have enough resources and let me pass on benefits to consumers.
Yes, you're right on that, Tamanna, because the fact is that even though oil prices have on paper been deregulated, in practice, oil prices in India are still politically determined. Whether it is by the Petroleum Ministry or whether it is by the Finance Ministry is immaterial. The fact is these are government mandated decisions. And since the oil market companies, the public sector oil market companies are virtually, dominate the market so entirely, it's very easy for the government to do it. So the fact is that every time the government does need money, it resorts to raising the excise duty and thereby, adjusting the oil prices depending on whether it can raise excise or not, regardless of what's happening to the international oil crude prices. But at the bottom of it all, Tamanna, is the fact for the government's need for resources, as Mr. Saurabh Chandra mentioned. Now, at a time like this, I don't think it's right for the government to try and raise tax revenues. Yes, your tax revenues, your corporate tax revenues, your income tax revenues, GST, everything is going to be far, far less than what you budgeted in the budget in February this year. But the fact is you need to look for alternate sources and alternate sources of receipts, not necessarily of tax revenue. In fact, it has been suggested by so many people, including conservative monetarists like Dr. Rangarajan, that at exceptional times like this, the government must turn to the Reserve Bank of India, try and monetize its deficit, maybe raise COVID bonds, do other things. Whereas this way of raising taxes, particularly on something like petrol and diesel, which are essentially pass through taxes because the prices of everything else is going to rise as a consequence. And as you said, the common man is already burdened.
Exactly.
So I think this was government's desire to garner revenue is understandable, but it must also take into consideration the circumstances in which the government is functioning. And if the desire is to get resources, have you sufficiently exploited all the other alternative sources? Are there no alternative sources? In that case, maybe I could justify it. Whereas today, I feel the government is shying away from restructuring its expenses, from monetizing its deficit, from looking for alternate sources, COVID bonds. So many suggestions have been made. But somehow the government does not seem to be willing to take those suggestions. And it is taking the easier option, as Mr. Sharma mentioned. It's so much easier to raise excise duty on oil. And then you get the petrol.
Let's say it as it is. It's the golden goose.
Absolutely.
It's the sitting duck. And let's also tell our viewers that between Jan to June this year, taxes and commissions on diesel have been increased by 15 rupees a litre. Between Jan to June this year, taxes and commissions on petrol have been increased by 8 rupees a litre. Yes, the government's cash strapped. Guess what? Everyone in this country is cash strapped right now. Everyone is strapped of cash. Everyone is struggling with resources. These are pass-through prices, so it impacts the prices of everything else as well. And it's also about a mindset. Mr. Sharma, I want to talk a bit about the mindset. all through we have seen methods of mopping up more revenues, trying to increase the taxes, but what about trying to increase demand? That method and that route is never seen. Today we saw this ridiculous sort of, debate about how much we should tax a roti and how much we should tax a paratha. That is the extent of imagination we have in terms of, raising taxes. Don't we need to relook at other revenues so that we don't, sort of have a government putting its hands in the pockets which are already beleaguered right now?
Look, I would partially agree, partially disagree. First of all, let me say something in favor of the government. Today, as I said, it's very abnormal times. Government is monetizing fiscal deficit. That target of 3.3% or 3.4% has been dumped somewhere. So now assessment is whether it will be 5.5% or higher than that. It is going to be definitely, to my mind, the fiscal the deficit this year is not going to be less than 6%. But I feel nothing wrong. These are abnormal times. The government has to take abnormal decisions. And also, this does not pinch the consumer very much, raising the rate from 74 rupees to 80 rupees. Well, it is 10-15% increase happening. It doesn't hurt very much. And look at the convenience. The most important part is the convenience for the government. There's no leakage of revenue. This is the most convenient mode of collection.
Sometimes we must look at convenience of the people as well. Not only convenience of the government. I want to just
I recall just one more sentence.
One minute. So one very important point you made. I want to get Mythili in on this. Mr. Sharma argues that 6 rupees doesn't hurt that much. It's not a big deal. We can do it. Now we have to talk about everyone.
Yes, madam. Because it's important, the government must understand that when you're talking of petrol and diesel, it's not as if it's only the richer car-owning people who, for whom petrol price hurts. Diesel is a pass-through. It impacts transport costs and it impacts the price of almost every other commodity, and it impacts every citizen in the country, including the poor. In fact, it will hit the poor most of all because their capacity to bear the higher price is so much less. And Mr. Sharma is right. Yes, the fiscal deficit has gone up, but so be it. Every other country in the world is not bothered about its fiscal deficit right now. We saw Moody's downgrading us, but we also saw S&P retain the rating. So I think this is a time when the government should not get so fixated about the fiscal deficit and try and ease the burden on the common man. So at a time like this, perhaps it could have held its hand back, allowed some increase in fiscal deficit, some cost of monetization, and not done this, because what has happened as a result is that the entire deregulation process has got a setback. It is deregulated on paper, but every time the government decides when it's convenient for the government, it raises the excise duty. When it's convenient for the government, it reduces the excise duty. So it's once again become a political weapon in the hands of government. And that is something that should be avoided, to my mind, Tamanna.
Do you admit, Mr. Chandra, you had first-hand experience of this? It is a political weapon in the hands of all governments. Suddenly, magically, everyone forgets to raise prices when any elections are around the corner. Everyone forgets. No matter what is happening with crude at that point.
All such decisions are a part of the political economy. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Prior to 2014, when the diesel prices were held firm, the subsidy burden at one time on diesel alone had gone up to about 90,000 crore.
Exactly, correct.
Now, this government has been lucky. So that's very important. So the prices haven't really gone up, except for a short period.
My point is the people of this country should also feel some of that luck. The luck should rub off on us as well. That's a simple point I'm making. I understand if the exchequer is lucky, that's great. But it's sometimes the question will be asked that when hamara number kab aayega? When will we see transparency in the pass-through of low crude prices? When will we see, if you're paying high taxes, some of that tax money being utilized? And now that COVID has come into the picture, it's a whole different ballgame.
At the moment, I don't think the government has too much choice. In normal times, maybe, what you're saying is correct. But as things stand today, with what is happening to all other revenues, it's not going to be easy. And this question of monetizing the deficits, printing, finally what you're doing is you're actually taking a hit on the future. The future generations will have to pay the price for that. Now, these are all choices. Now, the person who's taking a decision has made a choice. How it will fan out in the future, what the outcomes would be, what the impact would be, we'll just have to wait and see. We can only conjecture, we can only speculate at the moment.
Looking at the situation
today the priority with the government is to feed the hungry. So let the money come from wherever. Most important priority today is to feed the hungry.
But Mr. Sharma, do you think that the same people, the most vulnerable that the government needs to raise taxes for, are not impacted by diesel hikes? You know that's not the case.
Well, there are no choices. Only thing is, I keep saying that transparency. This daily price revision has taken away transparency altogether. The three companies, the executives, they meet in the evening, decide how much price increase tomorrow. They take a view, and let me tell you, Mr. Chandra is smiling. With the tacit clearance from the administrative ministry, from political bosses, decision is taken. Well, 90 paisa, okay, yes. So it gets announced. So my submission is, let there be transparency, let there be forthright coming forward. We have no choice but to intervene, but to take these sort of decisions. And today, unfortunately, are abnormal times. Government doesn't have a choice, but let them have the courage to say, we are taking these decisions. If there is a backseat driving, there companies are being asked to,
Well, I don't know if it helps the man on the streets to know that the government is transparent about this. Saying take it or leave it, because that is the situation right now. It's important that that voice is heard as well, that there is a burden which is difficult to bear, and this is the kind of burden which impacts everyone equally. No one is spared of it. That consideration must also be put in place with all the limitations that the government faces in terms of raising revenue right now. I will end it there, but I want to thank all of you for joining us on the first big discussion this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.